Yeah.
And being always willing. Now I think when I look forward in my life, I still believe in goal setting and making plans and all of that, but always with the idea that it may or may not go like that.
Right. Be flexible.
So be flexible because it may or may not turn out the way that you think.
Well, hey, everybody. I'm so excited to be here today. This is Cindy Bell with What the 50, and I have a special guest, Laura Wakefield. Hey, Laura.
Hey, Cindy, how are you?
I'm doing fabulous. How about yourself?
Great. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Thank you for coming on. I'm so excited because Laura and I actually met, how many years ago, Laura?
Oh, a lot. 30?
It's got to be over 30 because it was the late 80s.
Yeah, probably closer to 35.
Yeah, we were at BYU and we were both students there, and we were both very newly married, very young. And obviously we have this shared history. We were both in the Mormon church. We are not in it now, and we each have our own story about that. But Laura and I share a lot of similarities. Like, listen, Laura has 9 children. Like, how does that even happen? Well, we know how it happens. I mean, I have 5 and I get the, oh my gosh, 5 a lot, but 9.
Yeah.
9. What are their
I
ages?
get those responses when I tell people that quite often.
And what are their ages right now?
My oldest son is 31 and my youngest is 14, and I have 7 boys, 2 girls.
Okay. Well, tell us what you do. I don't want to speak for you. What do you do?
Well, mostly the same things you do, it seems like.
Kind of funny.
Yeah, I am a realtor. That's my probably primary source of income. I've been doing that for a long time in lots of different capacities. I enjoy it, but my passion, like yours, is more in public speaking, writing, connecting with people. I'm a certified life coach, and I'm just getting ready to open up my coaching practice again. That's where I love to be. Real estate is similar in the sense that I just love working with people and helping them to achieve their goals, whether that be finding the house of their dreams or getting unstuck in their life. It's a very similar process in a lot of ways. So I really enjoy that.
You're right. It really is. I hadn't really thought about that because I'm also a coach. So it's so weird how we have just gone down the same path in different areas. It's so strange. So you're going to open up your coaching business. You are starting a podcast, correct?
I will be very soon. Yes, it's going to be based on finding joy and reclaiming peace after you've been through trauma.
And have you published a book? Because I know
Not yet. I have one that I've started writing that hopefully will be coming soon. I'm kind of on your same path, just about 6 months to a year behind you.
Tell us about being married and raising kids in the LDS faith, and how, you can only talk about what you're comfortable talking about. For me, I'm pretty open about my journey in and out of the LDS church. I left the LDS church when I was 27. I just resigned. I wrote a letter and I said, here's why, because I just no longer embraced the doctrine. I didn't know. And some of my best friends and still extended family are LDS, and I love them dearly. And the people are wonderful. I have nothing, and the church can be wonderful for so many people. It's just, for me, it wasn't working. I have a lot of really strong opinions of, why, but I kind of want to get your take, what that was like being married and raising kids, and what that looked like for you and how it kind of unfolded.
Well, in a lot of ways, it's a lovely, beautiful life. You have a lot of friends. The church is very good about connecting, especially I was a stay-at-home mom for a lot of years. So you kind of have an automatic built-in group of friends and a support system. And you have this life plan that's very spelled out in front of you. You know where you're going, all of this stuff. And so it's kind of a bubble that you live in that I loved at the time, to be totally honest. I loved the bubble until the bubble burst.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't near any family. And so the church kind of became my family.
Right.
And so the positive parts about the church while raising kids were just that there was a lot of good role models for my children. There were friends, there were support when I had babies, people showed up with food, things like that. And there was lots of opportunities to serve. And really, I always had questions and little nagging things that would
Yeah.
not feel quite right to me. But I was so happy that
Yeah.
you don't ask a lot of questions because you don't want to mess it up.
Well, that's true.
You know what I mean? Like, it's like my life is going pretty well. I don't really know what will happen if I start to ask those questions. So I just won't. And I just will kind of ignore them. And then when I was divorced and the bubble kind of burst around me and everything was going haywire, all of a sudden it sort of opens all those questions up.
Yeah.
And since nothing's really idyllic and perfect anymore anyway, you suddenly feel, I guess, a freedom to start asking the questions.
Especially, in the Mormon church, you believe that you will be married for all eternity. And
Mhm.
so when that marriage ends, that dream kind of shatters. And so at that point, anything's possible, right? You got to look at everything. Everything's on the table. You look at things very, very differently. Would you agree?
Yes, absolutely. And not only do you believe you're going to be married for all eternity, you believe that that is central to your entire purpose and existence. So everything that you do is centered around that eternal marriage and building that eternal marriage and eternal family. So when that short circuits, you're not only facing the loss of a marriage, you're facing the loss of, in many, many ways, your entire identity,
Yes.
the entire fabric that held your life and your dreams and your vision of where you're going in your life together. So it's an extremely devastating experience to be divorced when you're in the Mormon church. And it is, I'm sure, outside the Mormon church too, because I've had one of those divorces too.
Right.
But
Yeah.
but when you are divorced in the church, there's something that's particularly disruptive about that to your whole internal psyche and the way that you look at life.
And I believe people truly do want to be helpful and accepting and non-judgmental, but I also think that it's very difficult within that culture to really stay connected in the same way that you were before.
Yes, absolutely. You don't fit quite the same way anymore. And people will tell you, oh, we still love you.
Yeah. Yeah.
But just the fact that they said, we still love you, says a lot. Why not just, I love you? We still love you, even though you're single.
Right. Because the still implies that there's a broken part of you. You're this way now, but we still accept you. Yeah.
Suddenly people don't know what to do with you anymore. You're kind of this very awkward entity that they aren't sure how to relate to you. It becomes very uncomfortable, even though people do, I think, mean well. Some of the things that they say are so intensely offensive and they don't mean to be. So I didn't feel anger. I just suddenly just felt myself feeling really out of place.
The other really important component of this whole thing is that as a woman, you rely on a man for your eternal place. In Mormon doctrine, it's the husband who calls the wife through the veil. And I don't want to say too much, but
well, I think too, just all those questions start to come up. Well, what happens if I never get married again?
Right.
What if I don't get married again? Can I no longer reach the top part of heaven? Can I no longer have all those blessings that I've been working for all of my life? Are those gone? And people would say very unhelpful things.
Right.
Like, I think my very favorite one that was said to me more often than you might believe was, it's okay. You won't be denied any blessings. If you don't find someone on your own, someone will be assigned to you. And I would just, really sound very appealing, actually. That sounded horrible to me. And people meant well when they said it, but I just thought, wow, okay, that's not comforting.
And, believe it or not, part of that doctrine could be you could be assigned to somebody else's husband, because polygamy was abolished from the Mormon faith being practiced here on earth, but it still very much is a part of their theology for the afterlife. So you could have been assigned to someone else's husband as wife number 3100.
Exactly. All of a sudden I thought, oh, that doesn't sound right. But not only does it not sound right, it sounds intensely, I don't know if unfair is the word, but it didn't sound to me like a God who loves me as much as everyone else. So it just opened up my mind to all these questions that I'd been afraid to ask before.
Yeah.
And once I started to ask them, the answers just weren't hitting the way that they did when I was sitting in the model family. And some
Yeah.
people choose to stay in the church. So I can't say that everybody would have the same response to that, to a divorce that I did. But for me, I think it was because I already had some underlying questions that
Yeah.
that was really the catalyst that sort of led me not only out of my marriage as it was ending, but out of the church as well. And so all of that happened simultaneously or within a few years' time with my first divorce. And that was a very traumatic experience.
Yeah.
No doubt about it. It is not an easy thing to go through either of those things, but have them both happening at the same time is very unsettling.
A lot of people don't realize this, but leaving the Mormon church can be an extremely stressful and traumatic event in and of itself.
Very. Absolutely. It's the hardest. I've been through a lot of really hard things in my life. It's by far the hardest thing. Because like we were talking about, it leaves you, you leave a divorce and you still have the rest of your life and your belief system and your value system to fall back on. When you leave a long-standing faith, and I imagine people outside the Mormon church that have similar long-standing, strong beliefs.
Right.
When you leave that, it leaves you kind of floating without a foundation anymore. And that is an intensely uncomfortable thing. I read at the time in Psychology Today that leaving a long-held religious tradition is the number one most traumatic psychological experience that you can go through. And I would, from my personal experience, I would say I agree that that's probably true.
Unless, for example, your entire family goes with you and your friends go with you at the same time. But when you're doing it alone and other people are looking at you like, really? Because the consequence of leaving the Mormon church is fairly serious. I was told very emphatically, even written a letter back, you will lose all of your eternal blessings if you actually follow through with this resignation. Do you understand that? So, I was young in my 20s. So for me, that was just really trippy. It's like, yikes.
I think that the hardest part was the people that would tell me what I was doing to my children.
Yeah.
Because I love my children as much as any Mormon mother, as much as I ever did when I was in the church. And so that was probably the hardest part that I waffled for a number of years back and forth, kind of one foot in, one foot out, because of that trauma, that idea that if I'm making the wrong choice here, what if I'm wrong? And what if it is, you just kind of do that. What if, and what consequence eternally will it have for your kids? And what might you be responsible for if you're essentially setting an example that leads them away as well?
Right.
That's an extremely difficult thing. And when people would imply that I made this decision lightly at all, that would really bother me because I thought, no, of course I've given this a lot of thought, an immense amount of thought for years.
So how long after you were divorced, how long did it take you to fully come out of the church and leave?
I was kind of on and off separated for several years before my divorce was final. And during that time, I was mostly starting to question. When I moved to Tennessee in 2012, about 4 years into it, I would say I spent another couple of years kind of going back and forth. I'd be completely out and then try to go back and then try to come completely back out. And then I would meet some nice people and I would try to go back, and I think that the final time for me was probably in about 2015.
Yeah, so it's pretty recent still.
Well, sort of. Like I said, there was probably a 7 or 8 year period of being on and off before the final break. And the final break came, I had sort of was in a phase of coming back, trying to come back. And they had asked me to teach primary, which, as you know, is the young, 3 and 4-year-olds. I was teaching the Sunbeams, who were, I think, about 3 years old.
Mhm.
And I was teaching a lesson about the temple. And I
Mhm.
saw all these cute little faces looking at me. And it just came over me so powerfully. You don't believe this. You don't actually believe this anymore. So how can you teach these little children this? It's not right. I walked out of that class and that was it.
And did you, like me, my story is I very quickly embraced Christianity, you know, non-Mormon Christianity, like evangelical Christianity, where you're taught, listen, you're saved by grace, and that Mormonism is a cult, and they're not saved, and they're not Christians, and they believe in works. Therefore, come over to us and you'll be truly saved. So I jumped into Christianity and got remarried very, very quickly.
There is this feeling when you've come to believe that something is the 100% truth, and then you start to doubt that it is. Your first instinct is to say, well, okay, there must be 100% truth somewhere, and I need to go
Exactly.
find it. So I visited literally, I think, every church. I mean, Christian churches. I studied Buddhism. I studied everything, even the kind of far out stuff. I read about it. And what I was finding was that there was truth and untruth everywhere. So I could find truth in almost every church I visited. I could find goodness. I could find wisdom. I could find faith. I could find fantastic people. And I could find things that made me go, I don't know about that. And so I kept ending up thinking, well, if I'm not finding the truth out there, maybe I was wrong and I need to try the Mormon church again. So I did this back and forth for a while before I finally came to this place that I'm at now, where I don't know what the truth is, the ultimate absolute truth. And I'm okay with that.
It's funny because when you're used to living in the black and the white, and then when you get out, you think, well, everything else has to be black and white as well. So like you were saying, what is the real truth? And then when you finally come to grips and come to terms with living in the gray and being comfortable living in the gray, it's very liberating.
It is, because the truth, actually, in my opinion, is that most of these big questions that humankind has been wrestling with since the beginning, whenever that was, people have been trying to put answers around these big questions that in our current state are really unknowable. We're never going to have an absolute. And so learning to be okay with that and finding peace and a sense of personal responsibility, because I think sometimes we're looking for that truth to just tell us what to do, because it feels too overwhelming to have a personal responsibility. We want someone to say, this is right, this is wrong, do this and you'll be good, and don't do this and you'll be good.
Well, it's so easy when you have the boundaries and the parameters.
Exactly. You know what to do every day.
The flip side of that is when you screw up, the guilt and the shame is horrible, because you color outside of the lines and you're screwed.
Well, and not only that, it becomes very easy to look at other people who are living a different truth. And I don't think of myself as a wildly judgmental person, but in essence, I was. I mean, I hate to say some of the thoughts that I had sometimes about other faiths, about other lifestyles, about other life choices. I did, because when you believe something is 100% absolute, then just by default, anybody doing anything else is wrong. It leads to kind of often distancing yourself from people who are different than you, not trying to understand them and not trying to explore other life paths, because that's the danger zone over there. If you step over there, it might lead you away. And of course, people look at someone like me as a perfect example. Hey, she stepped over there and it led her away. Look what happened to her, and they make wild assumptions about why you left and what you're doing now. When I was newly divorced, I was a hot mess. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what to do with my life. I was right in the midst of all of that. And so I ended up looking for someone that was 100% the exact opposite
Right.
of my first husband, which I think is common, without asking myself, well, is that the right way to go though? All I was looking for was 100% opposite of what I was leaving. So I got married way too fast before I really even knew who I was. It's not even so much that he was bad or anything like that, as that I didn't know who I was and what I wanted, and we weren't a fit.
Right.
And I was floundering so much that I couldn't see that. So I just got married way too fast the second time.
It's interesting you say you married somebody the exact opposite. I married someone very, very similar.
Oh, really?
Very, very similar, but not a Mormon, but a hardcore Christian. And so I kind of jumped from the frying pan to the fire, basically, and brought all my own issues with me. I was like you, I was a hot mess. I had not done any healing. I just went from here to here. Okay, here I am now. Now I'm going to have a lot more babies and I'm going to really be a good Christian now. And I'm going to make it work, but obviously it didn't. Now I want to ask you about the whole second divorce thing, because for me, the thought of getting divorced twice was extremely traumatizing, because who does that? Who gets divorced twice? Society forgives one, but when you're divorced twice, people are like, it really must be her. It's got to be her. So tell me your feelings around that.
Well, I had exactly a similar experience where that's not me. I wasn't even going to get divorced once. When I was a little girl growing up, I was going to get married and it was going to be forever. And I had a lot of idealism surrounding that. And even not only just society, but my own self, how could you get divorced twice? How can you do that? I think it shatters a lot of illusions.
Yeah.
That you had about the way your life was going to go, about marriage in general, about your own personality, about a lot of things. And it leaves you, again, sort of at rock bottom in a way. The second divorce was not as traumatic for me because I didn't have children with him. So I think that in part it was a cleaner break. It was more traumatic in other ways, financial ways, things like that. But, and just a self-esteem thing. I think I really came out of my second divorce at a real low self-esteem wise, really insecure about myself as a woman, as a potential partner to somebody. And I started right back on Bumble right after the divorce was final, trying to date again, and very quickly realized that I was not ready and not wanting to do what I did before and start dating before I was more healed. So in full disclosure, I haven't been on a date since last summer because I just knew I want to make sure this time that my ducks are in a row and that I'm healed, that I know who I am, that I'm not bringing baggage before I start all of that.
So where are you now, like in terms with your children? How have they dealt with everything that's transpired?
It was very, very hard. And it's very difficult, especially, so I was married the first time for 25 years. And I wasn't the only one living in a bubble. My kids were living in a bubble too. So when that shattered, it wasn't just my world and my marriage that shattered. It was their world and their family and their ideal of who their parents were. We had a lot of prominence in our congregation, and suddenly, it wasn't just them. Divorce doesn't just affect the parents, it affects the kids' whole worldview. And some of them really processed through a lot of that right in the beginning. Some of them, it really didn't come up in the beginning, and I thought they were okay. And it came up as they became adults and started getting married themselves. And a lot of stuff has come up for them that they've had to start processing at an older age. Most of my children ended up leaving the church as well. And I was pretty careful not to tell them to do that, or not to make them do that. Some left before I did.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, some left before I did, and they've all been on their own spiritual journey. It's really interesting to see where they've all landed with their personalities. Some are still quite spiritual. Some would maybe call themselves atheist.
Mhm.
Everybody has processed it all differently. But I think, the beautiful thing, I think, I like to say that divorce and the trauma of leaving the church was kind of like a train that just ran through my house and left a lot of wreckage and rubble.
Yeah.
But the beautiful thing about standing kind of in the rubble of your former dreams and ideals is that you can start over. And when you
Yes.
start over, you get to direct that path from a more mature place than maybe you were in when you made the choices that put you in your former life. So, and you can always do that from within a marriage too, and from within a church too. But sometimes I think trauma gives us internal permission to just completely reinvent ourselves in a way that we wouldn't have without the trauma. And my life today is nothing like it was 15 years ago.
What's your relationship like with yourself now that you've reinvented yourself and you've gone through the trauma and you've had that opportunity to rebuild?
That's a really interesting question. I liked myself before, but I didn't know myself before.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think that that's the difference. Is I think before I was fitting who I was into what I thought I was supposed to be. But I discovered when all of that went away that I honestly didn't know who I was. I had no idea. What do you like to do? I don't know.
Exactly.
What do you believe in? I don't know. And that was terrifying at first. It was very scary to
Yeah.
not know any of those things. But as I went through the process, it was actually really exciting to start to figure that out. And I'm going to say this too. I don't look back on either of my marriages as mistakes and say, oh, that was a waste of time. That was a mistake, or my time in the church. It's more, I feel like those were important parts of my journey to figuring out who I was.
Would you change anything?
There was a time when I would have said, absolutely, if I could go back, I would blah, blah, blah. Now I can only say, no, I wouldn't, because I don't know what that would have looked like. If I hadn't married so-and-so, if I hadn't joined the church, my life would have been better. No, how can you say that? I wouldn't have my kids. And I don't know what that would have looked like. It probably would have led me on a different journey that would have had its own set of traumas and its own set of life lessons. I don't know if it would have been better or worse. I think what I have learned from all of this is that there's no one way to be happy. There's no one way to live. There might be ways to live for you that bring you more happiness, but they might not be the right way for someone else. And so it's exciting for me to meet people that are different, that have different experiences, that even people who are super religious, I find it really interesting to talk to them and to learn from them. And right now, what faith looks like to me and what spirituality looks like to me is just this wide open opportunity to learn and to grow and to find truth from a lot of different sources.
Do you still believe in God or a higher power? What is your belief right now?
I do. And I still pray, and I still pray to God. The caveat that I would give to that, though, is that I don't see God the same way that I used to.
How did you used to see God?
I used to see God as a father figure, definitely a male figure, and kind of an old man, really, I guess. I don't, and that was very comforting to me. So honestly, when I picture God in my mind, in my prayers, that's still what I'm picturing, because it's familiar and comforting. However, intellectually, I know that it's probably not that. It's definitely, I don't think it's that.
So you didn't, because you joined the Mormon church when you were a teenager, you didn't grow up with this whole idea that maybe God is mad at you, that you're always in trouble, that you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. Because I grew up with the concept of God that sure, the narrative was God's a loving father, he loves you, blah, blah, blah. But it really was, he's mad at you because you're not doing enough. You're not being a good enough person. Did you have any of that?
No, my experience was a little bit different. So without going into tons of detail, my childhood was very difficult. I dealt with a lot of abuse as a child. I have a wonderful, wonderful mother. I want to put that out there. My mother was not part of it, but I encountered a lot of abuse from a stepfather, not my current stepfather, a previous stepfather, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, even some physical abuse. So I think that's why the church was so appealing to me, is because I had a lot of those messages coming to me already. So to me, God was a very loving father figure.
It makes sense.
God was a safe haven. And so God was my pathway out of that. I think I felt all the same things that you felt, that I could get in trouble and all the guilt and all of the shame and all of that, but I never felt it from God. I felt it from the church.
Interesting. Okay.
And sometimes there was times when I thought they were one and the same, but that was a lot of my problem, was that I didn't feel like a lot of the things that I was hearing in organized religion were loving. And in my mind, God, the universe, spirit, creator, whatever people call it, I think we're all saying the same thing, just with different words. It's just a higher power, a force, something you can tap into and connect with that brings wisdom and inspiration, is loving and is accepting and doesn't care what color your skin is, what your sexuality is, whether you're male or female, whether you dress a certain way or talk a certain way or have a tattoo or all of these things that
we forbid a tattoo.
Yeah, that we think, oh, this is bad, this is good, this is, I don't think that if you have an all-knowing source of wisdom and inspiration, I just don't think that it's going to get hung up on that stuff. Yes, I think God is love. I don't always think that the manifestations that humans create of God are loving. And I think that both of the things we're talking about, divorce, leaving a church, different people have different types of traumas. It's about shattering the illusions that you once had. And then coming to terms with the fact that the freedom that comes from having those illusions shattered, it's traumatic at first, but then it just lifts this set of expectations off of you that leaves you free to explore everything, everything that you want to, without judgment, without having something imposed on you. That you have to be this, you have to think this. And it took a long time. You probably found this too. So I came to terms with the church, but I was still doing that to myself in other aspects of my life. What kind of mom I needed to be, what kind of career person I needed to be, what kind of partner I needed to be. It took so long to apply the lessons I had learned over here.
Yeah, I still do it. Because we all have this default that in times of stress or, sadness or whatever, we kind of tend to go back
forward
to
in my life.
And so
I still believe in goal setting and making plans and all of that, but always with the idea that it may or may not go like that.
Right. Be flexible.
So be flexible, because it may or may not turn out the way that you think. So when you do something new, like start a podcast, it's hard not to immediately impose expectations of where's this going to go? What's it going to look like? And I'm trying very hard in my life not to do that, to just enjoy it.
Enjoy it. Well, that's your whole theme, joyfulicity, right?
Yes. Joyfulicity.
Yes. And learning to embrace the joy again and getting back to that place. I'm super excited to listen to your podcast once it's up and running, to read that book. So you need to get writing it, and just to watch you get out there, because you have so much. Oh my gosh, I love talking to you.
Is that we're so similar that, of course, everything that you say and do resonates with me so much.
So crazy. Who would have thought when we met, you were 19, I was 20. Who would have thought that
We were
all
babies.
these years later, we were babies. We were cute though.
I think we're still kind of cute.
We are. We're still cute. You were really cute though.
Oh, you're so
saying,
sweet.
you were a total babe.
I look in the mirror some days and I'm like, what happened? Wow, who is that?
Weren't you going gray for a while? You went gray for a while.
I was. So I'll just try anything. I actually let my hair go entirely gray, 100%.
Yes. Yeah.
And I love the idea of it. And I will probably do it again.
Yeah.
What I found when my hair came all the way in is it wasn't quite silver gray enough yet. And so it was kind of patchy and I just didn't like how it looked. It wasn't as gray as I thought. It was gray, but I still had, I don't know, it was very salt and pepper and I just wasn't a fan of how it looked, but I'll do it again in maybe 20 years. Give me 20 years and I'll try it again. But that was so freeing for me. Truly. It really was because I was one that very much worried what other people thought. Yeah, I did. And I still do to some degree, but walking around looking very strange for 2 years was quite liberating.
Yeah. Well, Laura, thank you so much for spending this time with me. I'm super excited to watch what you do next. And
thank you. I'm excited to read your book.
Thank you. It should be out really soon. So thank you. I appreciate it. So until next time, thank you everyone for listening and
thanks, Cindy.
Make it great.
Well, there you have it. Thank you so much for listening. And please, if you enjoyed the program today, please feel free to share. I appreciate you. Get out there and start living your best damn life. Until next time, take care.